Hi, I'm Petra. That's what.
Hey, Petra.
What does it mean to be a spiritual person in the midst of the craziness of our, just our life these days? Whether it's raising children, going to work, having to deal with the pandemic, or our political situation.
Really practical ways to tap into spirituality. Science of Mind has done that for me, and I'm excited to be doing this work with Oscar and Petra to show you how you can get into your own spiritual ebb and flow and and say what? Live the life that you really want to live.
We're going to put hot topics, current events like meditation, law of attraction, and manifestation, all this stuff that you have questions about, that I have questions about. We're going to spin the wheel, and then wherever it lands is what we're going to talk about that day.
So we'll hope you'll join us on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. for Say What on YouTube Live.
Here we are. Happy Tuesday. Happy Say What. I'm so happy that we're together. Say what? I love it. All right. How's everyone doing?
Fabulous.
Yes, queen. Oh my God, look at Shakira in her purple.
I know, it's fabulous.
She's looking like royalty up in here. I love it. I love it. Okay, so today we're going to talk about something that's been like just kind of nagging at my heart because I've seen it happen and I haven't really known like how to process it. So I just want to bring it to the floor and see what you guys think about it. But so we've known that since this pandemic has happened, there's been this huge rise, 190% rise in anti-Asian American crimes. And recently we've seen in San Francisco, a grandfather was murdered, and then in San Antonio, another one was murdered, and then there was a restaurant in San Antonio where the owner of the restaurant recently came out and said, we're still going to be requiring masks at our establishment because we want to protect each other and respect each other in that way. And the next morning he came into work and people had spray painted like, commie and go back to China and you don't belong here. And it's been kind of heartbreaking to see that happen over and over and over. I mean, just last year there this website listed, including sources and videos and photos of, I mean, like one example was this Korean grandmother walking down the street, and people started chasing her and like doing slurs, like throwing slurs at her, but she didn't know. So she thought they were joking, and so she was laughing. And then she realized, oh, this isn't, they're not joking. So she started running for her life. And it's just like, to see the look of horror, to see her switch from like, oh, they're not, oh, this isn't fun. Like they're actually trying to hurt me. In a grandmother's face, it's just like, oh my, I just can't handle it. And during the start of it, when we started seeing all these news come out, my brother and I told my parents, like, you just, when we say quarantine, you are literally just stay in your house. If you need groceries, we will go buy the groceries and deliver it to you. Please just don't leave the house. And it just sucks that we have to have that conversation in 2020 into 2021, that we're still having these conversations. And so one of the, the Asian community, one of our root causes that we've seen from this is because of our previous president. Just the rhetoric is just unbelievable with Kung flu and the China flu. And it's like, most of us have not even been to China when we've grown up in America. And so when he says stuff like that, we're the ones who get attacked physically, verbally, and people have been killed over it. So what is that about? How, what, who, what, when, where, why? What do we do here?
Right. Well, Shakira, I'm imagining that you can speak to your experience.
Oh, you're muted. You're muted. You're muted, my love.
Oh, wow. Sorry.
It's okay. You're so cute.
Well, speaking from the position, speaking from my position as a African-American, Indigenous American person that has seen these types of things happen to our community too, it's like, I mean, it's unspeakable. I mean, just where do we draw the line at how we treat others? I know I was just reading in some of the text and information from our Inward Journey class, Petra. It talks about the golden rule. I mean, when do we harmonize on that? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Who would want their grandmother to have to walk in such fear, grandfather to live in such fear, especially when they're just trying to do the right thing? Totally, I can resonate and understand that. I mean, I've had to deal with the fear of just letting my husband walk out the door. I mean, a Black man, and I have a Black son, so yeah, I totally feel that right now. And it's unspeakable. It's nonsense. It seems like it's not even human. I mean, in the sense of connection and unity with one another, and just that we're the same thing. We're the same being. We have different colors. We have different ways of, orating and being in this world, but we're the same. We're the same.
Yeah, and we're also going through the same experience together. We're in this pandemic together. We are like trying to support each other and be there for each other. So it just really doesn't make sense that we're having the same experiences, and yet you still feel the need to attack. It just doesn't. Yeah, right. I don't know. I can't process it.
Yeah, there's so many levels to the answer, right? Or there's so many levels to why is it going on? Why do we experience it? And I think Oscar, the part of it at why we see the resurgence of it, especially with Asian Americans, is the rhetoric that has made, and we've seen the escalation of the Black men being shot by police, just out and out, and just the increase of all kinds of hate and violent crimes. And yeah, and there's just so many different ways one can approach it. For me, the saving grace is that my experience and my observation is that it's a small vocal minority, right? And so my son was raised in an alternative religion and in an alternative household in the Buckle of the Bible Belt here in Texas. And when I took him to kindergarten, he had a lovely, lovely, lovely woman as a teacher, young, shall we say, somewhat stereotypical East Texan young blonde woman with quite a twang, and I immediately went, oh shit, this is not good. I was immediately prejudiced against her, immediately, because I thought, well, how am I going to navigate this? So I went to her in the parent-teacher meeting. I stayed behind the parent-teacher meeting, and I said what I said every year following that to every teacher that he ever had in elementary school. So my son lives in an alternative family, and we go to an alternative faith tradition. Is that going to work for you in your classroom? I have to tell you that I was embarrassed by how prejudiced I had been because of how she responded. She even called me one day and said, next tomorrow we're using D for dad. Should I change that? Does Jason have a dad? And it was like, yes, he does. And he has a good relationship with his dad. Thank you so much for calling. So the first thing, right, was that. So Jason was in first or second grade, and we started having hateful things written on our garage door so that he could come home to it. And what I realized at the time, right, and it's the thing that I cling to now, is two things really. One, it is a minority of people. It really, truthfully, I know in that town where those people wrote those things on that wall, that's not what most people feel. Even if some of them feel it, they would never behave that way because they actually know better. And I do believe it's coming up to be healed. I believe it's more and more and more evident because we are healing this deep wound that we have about otherness. And I think ultimately that comes out of fear. It comes out of fear. I don't understand you. I don't know where you're coming from. You have a different culture. You look a little different. You sound different, whatever it is. And that then puts the way that I think and the way that I live into question, right? What if you believe something differently than I do? Well, if I don't pound on my belief and demand that my belief is right, well, if I can make space for yours, what happens to mine? Right? And that's a really fearful place. It's a hugely fearful place because now I have to give up my childlike certainty for adult uncertainty, for the mature living in paradox, for the deep consciousness that it takes to fulfill, treat your neighbor as yourself, love your neighbor as yourself, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? Because that actually takes imagination and empathy and compassion and heart and all of those things. And it's messy. Being human is a messy, messy business. And the people that we're trying to then embrace, they're not perfect either. So they do actually do stuff that we don't like or, whatever that we're really uncomfortable with. Yeah. And so I see this. And so we have really seen, I think, I affirm at every level of my being that the good that comes out of the last 4 years and the rhetoric that has brought all of this to the surface has allowed us unequivocally to see the underbelly. Right. And we can only bring things that are in our programming and in our subjective mind. We can only do something about it when we can actually ultimately see it. It has to be brought up to be healed. And it's ugly and it's messy and we don't want to look at it. And we don't want to think of ourselves as though that kind of a person, but we do hateful things in our own relationships. Right. We treat people poorly in our own relationships, not because we mean to be, malicious, but we are because we have old patterns and false beliefs. So culturally, we have old patterns and false beliefs. Yeah. And you can trace this back. You can trace it back to the colonial times, right? The Europeans had to have a way of seeing people that would allow them to simply run over other countries. So they had to manufacture a sense of inferiority to brown-skinned people. But That was actually not hard to do, because before colonization, in the feudal system, brown-skinned people were peasants. They were out in the fields. They were tan. And so how you showed that you were royalty was two things. One, you were fat because you had as much food to eat as you could possibly eat. Everybody else was thin as a rail, right? 95% of the population was thin as a rail because they didn't have enough food. So you were fat and you were milky white. Your skin was milky white. That was how you evidenced your caste. You evidenced that you were part of royalty by being the whiter you were. The Eastern culture, not that different. Watch the geishas and the women with the whiteness of their face, right? Because it got associated with the peasants in the field and the learned people and the aristocracy and the royalty, right? And the more higher up the chain you were, you had to, the whiter you had to be. And of course, in China, it was the long fingernails, right? Because you didn't do anything. You didn't even feed yourself.
Or the
so the longer your fingernails were, the more royalty you could evidence, right? So we have this whole system of hierarchy, which I'm sorry to say, present company accepted, I'm sure, comes directly out of patriarchy.
Yeah.
Directly out of patriarchy, right? If you think about if you think about the whole fight or flight syndrome, right? They did some interesting studies about fight or flight, and they did it only on white men, which was really interesting. All those studies about fight or flight. And when they did studies on women, they did them on white women and women of color. There was no difference. Women don't have as strong a flight or fight response. Their response is tend and befriend.
Wow.
Tend and befriend. Because if you go all the way back to our survival brain, right, our reptilian brain, you go all the way back to living in the caves. What did the man have to do? He had to decide, can I fight this animal or do I run away? Can I fight this insurgence of another tribe or do I run away? Am I strong enough to do it to protect or do I run away, right? That was a crystal clear response. Whereas the women are in the cave or they're gathering their food and they have children and they have all kinds of things they have to take care of. They have all the belongings. Do we have to, are we going to be overrun? Do we have to protect each other? And so what they're doing is they're looking for the people that they can collaborate with so that the children and the goods are safe. So it's tend the children, tend the goods, and find who you can befriend so that you can do so much more collaboratively, right? And so I'm sorry to say, some of the root of this is right in patriarchy, fight or flight. I don't understand you. And of course we need scapegoats, right? I'm terrified I'm going to get this damn virus. So what do I do with my fear? I project it outwards. I'm a man. I'm not going to show you how afraid I am. I'm a white person. I'm certainly not afraid. So therefore, I'm going to project that out. And so now I need a villain. I need a scapegoat. And what we saw in the last 4 or 5, 6 years was the villainization of people who believe differently than us.
Yeah.
And that rhetoric has created countless horrible incidences. And yet, the good that comes of it is it has brought it to the surface. People have felt okay. The minority, those people who feel like it's okay, the bully minority or the frightened minority, because that's all a bully is somebody who's terribly frightened, doesn't know what to do, right? So they bully. And so that's brought that all to the surface. And for a while it was okay. But in living color, the majority of people have no interest in behaving that way. They don't expect to have people in their own communities behave in that way, right? And we also have tons and tons and tons of examples where synagogues and temples and Black churches and different places have been graffitied, and the community has rallied around and said, not in our community. No, we don't do this in our community, right? And I think so let me just say one more historical thing. I can always go on and on and on about history. Is also then we have our Judeo-Christian culture, right? And what did our Judeo-Christian culture do? The Hebrews were overrun in a 5,000 period of time the Hebrews, which were the indigenous people of that area, they were overrun, I think, 8 times by empires, one after another, over a 5,000-year period of time, right? So they were overrun by the Phoenicians and the Ottoman Empire and the Egyptians and the Roman Empire and Alexander the Great and the Byzantine Empire and blah, 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 and Babylonian and whatever all else, right? And yet they wanted to maintain their own culture, their own people. They were a people. This was their space, and they were a people. And so how they maintained it was by saying, the way in which we are is godly, and the way in which those people are is not, because they're different than us. So if you go and you do what they're doing, you're not godly. And the way that you stay safe and protected, right, is you do what we do. So then you just make everything else wrong, because you're simply trying to maintain, right? And we see this with our indigenous people here in the North American continent, how challenging that is. And how what did we do? We drug all the kids over to boarding school, took away their names, their language, their religion, and tried to make them over, right? And for whatever reason, the Hebrews, they were able to so tightly weave to their religion that they were able to maintain something, even though then we went through the diaspora and all of that. But that seed, we're chosen and you're not, that is embedded in the Judeo-Christian culture of the West, the Western civilization. Now, I can't speak for the caste system of India or China, or I don't know where all of that comes from or why. But in the Western culture, right? So you add that to patriarchy, then you add that to, you're a royal if you're lily white. The more tan you are, the more of a peasant you are. You're the 98% of people who basically don't count in the feudal system. Then you add on top of that colonization, and you need a reason to be able to just take people's land. Well, obviously they're brown, so they clearly aren't as good as we are, right? And you can just see how this whole system is. So now otherness is built into our culture. Right. And so it's so completely out of integrity with our any spiritual tradition. Every spiritual tradition has a version of the golden rule. So historically we can see why that's happening, and then we can really see the power of words. You start giving people permission to be their worst self, you open the Pandora box. We all have a worse self. We all do. And you give them permission and make it okay, and you hook it with all of that history that we've just talked about. This is why I think it's so important for us to understand our history. It's so important for us to understand what's playing out, and we must guard against it. I mean, I had to realize that I was utterly prejudiced about this little blonde woman who was from East Texas who spoke with a twang, because I'm a Yankee from Philadelphia and I was raised as a European, right? I came to Texas with all kinds of prejudices. And she taught me something. I had to guard against it. Not until you act or behave in a way that is inappropriate, that I find offensive, then I get to have an opinion about that. But to just on the face of it, right? That's what prejudice is. And she actually was so amazing. She was Jason's kindergarten teacher. Then all of those kids moved to first grade. So they had to add a class to first grade. So she got to move up. She got to take 4 of her kids from her class with her because they were all basically dispersed. She got to pick 4 of them. One of them was Jason.
Oh, I love that.
Right?
Wow.
And she taught me so much. Right. And so I think, so let me just say one more thing, then you guys can talk, because I want to hear from you too. This is just, it's all kind of, it's such a complicated issue.
Yeah.
And I think the truth is that it's easier to be lazy around our consciousness. It's just easier. It's easier to project our fear instead of own it. It's easier to find a scapegoat than to deal with our own fear. It's easier to make other people wrong and cling to our supremacy than it is to go, wow, things are really changing. I wonder what it's changing into. I'm not really sure. And we've been in the I'm not really sure now for a year, which has exacerbated all of that, right? All that uncertainty. If you don't have spiritual coping skills for all that uncertainty, you chase grandmothers down the street. Like, what the is that? And people who then seem to also self-identify as church-going Christians. Like, really? Chasing grandmothers and grandfathers and young Black boys? I mean, really? But I think this is what humanity is. That I think these are our most difficult. Well, I don't say most difficult. I mean, the atom bomb was a difficult growing pain too. I think these are our, these are our difficult growing pains of humanity. What does it mean to be a human? What does that mean? What does it mean to see somebody else? I mean, I look at you guys, you look at me, like, yeah, Shakira, we're all the same. We have different cultures, we have different backgrounds, we have different ways of engaging in the world. The diversity is so beautiful because it's a unique expression of the oneness that we are. God, we wouldn't want to all be little robots. The Nazis tried that.
Yeah.
Not a good idea.
Wow.
Right? Can't speak for anything in the East nearly as much. I haven't studied nearly as much, so I choose, I don't want to. But yeah, it's so this is where, for me, I have to find some compassion. I know that those people who are behaving in that way, they are also children of the one infinite life. They are in fact seeking to express life. They're just ignorant.
Yeah.
They're ignorant of the truth of our oneness. They're ignorant of emotional ability to deal with their fear. They're ignorant about the beauty of diversity and the amazing gift that every person and every culture is to humanity as a whole. It's just ignorance. It's ignorance in its most base form. It's an unwillingness to become not ignorant.
Right. You brought up such crazy, interesting points because I never thought of the white skin thing until when you said that, I was like, oh, because there is a trend in China and in South Korea where you bleach your skin to not be as brown. Mm-hmm. You lighten your skin to look more white. And in South Korea, their kids are given plastic surgery as a high school graduation gift to fix our eyes so we look more Western, to fix our noses so it's more thin and to look more Caucasian. Those are graduation gifts in South Korea, to look more Western.
Right.
Holy shit. Like,
yeah, really.
It's now starting to when you said that, I was like, oh my God, it's all connected.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
Right.
That's terrifying. But Shakira, I'm sure because I felt it too, but this growing up, this sort of pressure to fit in or to fit the mold of, I don't know, how would you, what has been your experience? Because I've thought about, maybe I should fix my nose. Maybe I should, wear this or do, present in a way that isn't so, Asian, so different. So, oh, I'm not from America, basically. Because I felt that pressure all my life. What has been your experience going through that growing up?
Well, I've had a couple of different experiences. So I grew up and I had a family of people that I was connected to that were white people, and they didn't treat me different. So when I was growing up, some of my first experiences with white people was not negative. I mean, they called me their little pepper flake, but it was a cute way of just including me in the family. I was a dark one. But that was my Girl Scout sister and brother, and I still connect with them. I still, reach out to them and everything, and they're in a whole nother part of the country now. But I didn't feel just negatively bombarded by being Black, at that point in time. It wasn't until I got into, I'd have to say it was more into middle school
where you could really tell the difference. We had just moved into a home, and there was a guy that lived behind us. He actually happened to be a judge, and he called me a nigger, like flat out. I was outside in my backyard, and my dogs were barking, and he was telling my dogs to shut up. And I was like, they're just trying to protect us. And I said it out loud. He said, shut up, nigger. And I was like, whoa, where did that one go? You know, like just completely took me by surprise. And then I got my first job. I used to work at Six Flags over Texas. And, you know, the kids they're playing, and I'm a games hostess. So I'm the one on the mic, and I'm like, hey, everybody come right up and play the game, et cetera, right? And I had some kid walk up to me and kick me and call me a nigger and run off and laugh. And I was like, now whose home training is that? Like, this is a real thing. So as I got older, and of course, being in different environments and educational environments, and then choosing to embark on multicultural leadership and things like that, I was able to merge with other people of other cultural backgrounds and respect those backgrounds. And we had those dialogues, and we talked about these things. So my experience was a bit different, but the reattribution of memory by our media, by different political figures and how they use the language, by different experiences that I've read about and learned about in terms of things that have happened to Black people just for trying to protect themselves, their family, COINTELPRO, which still exists, and people being killed for just trying to experience equality and rights and love and protection for their own. There's so much, like we could have this conversation all day, but I've had several different experiences. I did not grow up learning to hate people. I did not grow up in an environment where I was taught to be fearful of other people. So I didn't have that experience. But when you're taught that this is how people are going to treat you, then it puts you in a position to, or put me in a position to be, you know, on guard. So I was taught how to be on guard, you know, for when people are going to do it, but I was not taught to hurt or to hate or to go in expecting, you know, to have to be rude or to have to, you know, there's a lot on this subject, and it's kind of emotional to even talk about.
I know.
You know? Because you're talking about, like, I'm just one Black person. I do not speak for the entire Black race, but there are so many different experiences that I have heard and things that I have seen. You know, I've been to the museums, I've been in the classrooms, I've been in the streets, I've been in those different places. And I've even seen, you know, my own cousins, my own family members' names on a cloth of those that have been hung. You know, like they've been sewn, their names have been sewn into this cloth in the Detroit, Michigan, African Diasporic Museum of the names of men that have been hung by white men. So there's a lot of push and pull on this one, Oscar.
Yeah.
And honestly, growing up, I was also taught that, you know, people of your skin tone or people that were Asian had even more privilege even than I do. Let an Asian person say it and it makes sense. Let a white person say it and it makes sense. But let a Black person say it and it doesn't make any sense. Yeah. You know, so yeah, there's a lot to that.
Yeah, this is something that I've actually wanted to talk to you about in private, is this kind of like underlying tension between the Asian American community and the African American community. And it started with Ronald Reagan saying that we were the model minority. That we were the model minority. Look how hard they work. Look how far they're getting. When the reality is, yes, we're working really hard, but only like a select few lucky ones are getting to where they say we are the model minority. The rest of us, like my parents, work 14-hour days, 7 days a week, no vacations ever, growing up in America, and we still struggle to put food on the table. And some days we had no electricity or running water. Like, you know what I mean? Like this is the model minority myth that was literally perpetrated so that it would separate us and you and your community. Because there are so many parallels to our stories and our ancestors' stories growing up in America that we have to separate them. They cannot possibly coalesce and join together. And you know what I mean? So like, I feel like it was such a planned, specific thing to perpetrate that tension between us, which now that I've been educated, I was like, oh, fuck that. Now that I see the truth, I'm like, I am not playing this game that you guys want us to play. I'm not playing. Period. I am not playing this freaking game. This is ridiculous. So every time I see that tension, I call it out. Anywhere I am, I call it out. I was like, no, up. You are literally falling into the trap that's been laid for you, for our community. Stop it. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's such a powerful and scary thing to talk about. But yes, you're right. There is that tension still between Asian Americans and African Americans to this day. It's horrifying.
Yeah, and you think about also the way that's been built between the African American community and the Latino community.
Yes.
Right. So under Caucasian, you get to pick whether you're Hispanic or not.
I've noticed that. It drives me nuts.
Because you're white, you have some whiteness in it. You might be from Spain. You might be. There she is.
Yay, you're back.
I said, oh my goodness, I'm frozen, and then the computer went completely blank.
Oh no, yeah. You're back.
I agree with you. I think that these rules, these mores and values have to be analyzed. Like, who's making them, and what is the means to the ends? What is the motive behind it? Because any place where there is separation, there's a motive of something that, like there's a divide and conquer thing in space, and
the motive is power.
Exactly.
The motive is power. The motive is staying in power, and the point is to divide, right? Yeah. Divide the women from the men, divide all the minorities from each other, right? Divide all of that. So why has the LGBT community sprung over all the minorities and actually in a relatively short period of time been able to get one of the most important rights, right? Same-sex marriage. Why? Because we've spent however many years before it became vilified, in most indigenous cultures, homosexuality was not, right? And certainly not in the Greek culture. But when because we've been able to pass. Because there are no identifiable features unless one chooses to be very butch or very flamboyant gay, right? Unless one chooses, one can pass. And that whole notion of passing, right? And it has really undermined the ability for minorities to come together. And I think part of that whole model minority myth made it possible for Asians to pass, right? Which is why I think it's so utterly horrific, and to a certain extent to the sensibility, when now the model minority is also being hounded in a way that the African American people have been hounded for centuries.
Exactly.
Right. Although let's not forget, right, the Chinese were originally brought over here to build the railroad, and I will never forget first time I drove toward Denver, Colorado. This was maybe no more than 15 years ago. And there was one of those plaques on the side of the road, the such and such a massacre. And I thought, oh no, another Native American massacre, how horrible. I don't know anything about this. And I went and researched it. Oh no, not a Native American massacre. The railroad was finished. The railroad was built. So they took all the Chinese folks that they had brought over to build the railroad, all their families, wives, children. They said, we're going to bring you all together and we're going to help you get settled. We're going to help you now find jobs. So come to this place. I don't want to say the number of people because I don't actually remember at the moment, but I'm going to say it's at least in the six figures of some iteration of six figures. I'd have to go look it up again. And they did the same thing that they did the Native Americans. They simply surrounded the camp and slaughtered every man, woman, and child in it because they didn't need them anymore.
Yeah.
They didn't need them anymore. They didn't want them anymore. They were seen as, well, beasts of burden. When your beast of burden can't do it anymore and you don't need them anymore, you slaughter them. You don't want to feed them, take care of them, help them find anything. I mean, it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. And I think that's one of the reasons why for a long time, when women began to move into politics, that whole idea of tend and befriend was all demeaned as the women's what did they call it? The women's sensibility. Oh, that's just the women's way. They don't really get war, and they don't really get the, basically fight or flight thing. And for years and years and years, that has been diminished, because I can't imagine when the divine feminine is fully embraced as the match to the divine masculine, that it would be possible to stand there and slaughter an entire village of men, women, and children, Chinese, Native American, African, whomever, Afghanistan, people in Myanmar, Hindu, Islam, right? And I think the only thing that I can say is I believe that our cultural, the response of being horrified that we see in our culture, that's the good news. 100 years ago, some people were horrified. 500 years ago, nobody was horrified, except for the individuals whose lives were affected, the wife or the husband or the kids. Nobody was horrified, because 95% of the people on the face of the planet were peasants, and they were considered beasts of burden. They were owned by the feudal lords. Their land was owned by the feudal lords. They were barely people, barely. And everything was punishable by either death or cut off their hand. Right? So the fact that we're horrified by it, that in and of itself, to me, is the awakening.
Yeah.
And I think we should never stop being horrified by it. I think even as spiritual people, we shouldn't say, well, it's just, somehow karma working out, or, well, I'm just going to accept it, and I'm just going to, love everybody, and I'm just going to be resigned to it, and I'm whatever the spiritual bullshit is.
Yeah.
Right. I think that it is it is the fact that we actually are horrified by it that begins to show us that there's something really, really, really wrong at the core of the way that our culture has understood in people.
Yeah.
And in their differences and it's all about power and money and all that getting, which ultimately comes from who owns the land, right?
Yeah.
Who owns the land?
Right.
And we can trace it back so far and just see how it compounds and compounds. But we're awakening. Humanity is awakening. We are awakening. Now that we're seeing these things on YouTube, we're seeing them on Facebook, we are horrified, and we should be horrified. And I take comfort in the fact that truly, I have nowhere have I seen where there is where the horrified response is less than the cheering.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? Whereas it
Exactly.
used to be the cheering was bigger than the horrified response.
Exactly.
Right? People cheered when the black men were lynched. And so that's right. That's the infinitesimal progress. And I think of each and every person, like every black man that's been shot, all these, Asian Americans that have been, hounded and whatever. I think of each one of them as martyrs sacrificing themselves for humanity's enlightenment. And all I know how to do is to be grateful for their sacrifice.
Yeah.
Because if I believe that life is eternal, I know those lives aren't lost. They're lost to us, but they're not lost. And that is a sacrifice that is being made for us to wake up. God, hopefully we wake up sooner rather than later about
Right.
this and about our planet and about a bunch of other things. But holy shit. So I don't want to not be horrified. I don't want to get locked into Ain't It Awful, or I don't want to now find another scapegoat, right? I don't want to now do, right? That's the danger.
Exactly.
History has shown us oppressed people, they move out of oppression, and then they just simply do what was done to them.
Exactly.
Right, which is the sins of the father down to the seventh generation, over and over and over again, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right? The pendulum just swings and swings and swings. And I think it's the spiritual awakening, which I do ascribe to the feminine sensibility, that has to break the cycle.
Yeah.
You know what?
I was in, when I, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, you just said something when you talk about break the cycle. When I was in class yesterday, I noticed this. When a person came for prayer, they knew what was going on up to that point. And Sherry asked, well, can you remember a time where it was different, where it was exactly what you wanted to happen? So I'm wondering, what about the attribution of a positive memory in place of the negative memory that we are being fed? Because as we're being fed this fear, we respond from that fearful place naturally, unless we take, the conscious effort and attention to do it differently. I definitely don't want to have the reattribution of all of the things that my ancestors have had to go through then impact how I operate and move in the world. So do you feel it's our responsibility to create more memories like this gathering of us together, like us embracing one another, that we can have a space to come back to and claim the truth, and then move in that truth? Is that what we do when we talk about a new thought? Is that what we do when we talk about moving and living in the science of mind?
That's a great question. And I would say the answer is that is one of the ways we do it, right? Because we can, in fact, always find moments of good. And we can, in fact, find moments where people have treated each other well, where we've actually been treated well by somebody who is an other, where we have seen somebody stand up for somebody else, where we have been inspired, whether it's even in a piece of art, a movie, a book, a piece of a visual piece of art, where we've been inspired to see and experience that, what you're calling a positive memory. And yes, and I think that's, in psychology, they call that reframing, right? We reframe and in science of mind, we call it look for the good. If you can even find one good moment, one, compared to the 99 not, if you can find one and focus on that which you focus on grows, right? It doesn't deny that the 99 happened. It doesn't make them any less. It really doesn't do anything with the past. What it does is give you a handle on creating the future, right? So you take the one and you focus on it, right? And then maybe one day you'll have two, right? And then it begins to exponentially grow. And then somewhere along the line, you have 1,000, and the 99, they didn't go away. They didn't stop being hurtful or hateful or horrible, but now it's 99 of 1,000 instead of 99 of 100, right? And that's what shifts consciousness and creates something new. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is the fact that we are, in fact, capable of imagining things we've never experienced. We are. And that's the other way in which we have a new thought, right? The philosophical version of the golden rule, right, is treat everybody as if do everything as if what you do can be turned into a universal maxim. Do everything as if what you're going to do can be turned into a universal maxim. And the other piece of it is treat people as ends, never as means, right? Which is, of course, the Chinese, the AfricanAmerican slaves, right? They were just means. They were means to an end. They weren't being treated as ends in and of themselves, right? And we do the same thing with nature. We've been treating nature as means as opposed to an end. But it's hard to know. It's hard to know what does that look like? What does that feel like? What does that seem like, right? And so then we take from the Native American tradition, walk a mile in someone else's moccasins. Well, how do you do that? How do you walk a mile in someone else's moccasins? You imagine it. That's what the romantic poets, the whole romantic movement in art and literature, poetry, in all of the visual art in the Romantic period was about imagining something other than what we have experienced in the past, and imagining it out picturing our highest ideal, right? So I imagine walking another person's shoes. I imagine my life without prejudice. I imagine, and that's why I think John Lennon's song speaks to us and has for so long. There's something within us that responds to that. It's not daydreaming, it's not wishing, it's not hoping. It's like literally imagining it. What would that be like? And We don't have to know how we're going to get there, but we hold that end result. And then I can take my imagining and I can begin what you're doing, Shakir, about memories, right? That's what I do when I now look for evidence that supports my imagining, because my imagining feels like really out of alignment with my actual experience, right? Mm-hmm. But there's always those glimmers, those moments where I have in fact experienced something that is like what I'm imagining. So now, instead of collecting evidence about all the ways I've been discriminated against as a woman or LGBT, all the ways that I've experienced hate, all the ways that's right, instead of gathering evidence for how horrible people are, now I'm going to start gathering those individual moments, those little moments of light that show me that what I'm imagining is actually real. It's completely possible, right? And it's built out of this deep spiritual sense of truth. And so those two things, then they start working together. And the more that I work with them, they both grow. And I think that's what it means to have a new thought, right? Have a new thought. What does it mean to celebrate everybody's diversity while still actually deeply understanding that we are actually all one?
Yeah.
What does that look like? What does that mean? How do I celebrate my Germanic heritage while understanding that I'm an American and I'm understanding that I'm a citizen of the world? Can I hold all those as simultaneously? Do I have to pick one of them?
I think this is one of the great things that, like, this is like one of the strongest points about why I'm so drawn to CSLDallas and Science of Mind is when, like, just today you talked about this, all of this trauma and all of these patterns that you can spot. These are patterns. They are just all behavioral patterns, traumatic patterns, like, and what I've learned here is, like, spot the pattern and you are creating a new cause. You can just create a new pattern. Hello. And so I'm just like, oh my gosh. And you keep talking about we're awakening to it. And every day, even in media, you see new thought ideas pop up everywhere, in movies and films and TV shows, and even in comics I've seen new thought ideas. I'm just like, that's new thought. That's what we're talking about here. I feel like you're so right that we are, as a collective, we are actually awakening to the truth of who and what we are.
And there will always be the bell curve, right? There'll be those at the head of the bell curve that are already there. There's the majority that are moving, and then there's those that are coming, kicking and screaming, right? And those are the people that are writing on the walls of that restaurant.
Exactly right.
Right. And while we can have empathy for their fear and the empathy for the manipulation that has happened in the rhetoric, the political rhetoric has really allowed that Pandora's box to open. We do also get to say, and that behavior is unacceptable.
Yeah.
Because we are actually moving. We are actually moving, right? And I loved what you said, Oscar. They are patterns. They're not truth. They masquerade as truth.
Exactly.
And when the rhetoric is, this is the truth, that's where it becomes confusing, which is why people need to understand history. They need to learn how to critically think. They need to read philosophy. And I know for so many people, it is boring. I want to play my game and I want to talk about how I feel and I want to go have my coffee and I want to make money. Okay. But, right, all of that provides context and understanding to be able to really see the pattern. And it's not the truth, but we're seduced into thinking it's the truth. Right, at every level, we're seduced into thinking it's truth. That somehow some grandma in Texas had anything to do with the pandemic. Like, really? Like how is that even possible?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, it makes no sense, period, no sense. And yet we are if we're not critically thinking about what we're thinking about and how we're being manipulated, the left, right, and center, politically, through advertising, everything, right? All of that critical thinking. Now, that doesn't mean skepticism and nothing's true. It means everything is weighed against, is it universally true? If this thing were universally a universal maxim, would that be good? All people should have thin noses. All people should have white skin. Most white people spend a lot of time getting brown skin. They go out and they lay in the sun.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Right? These things make no sense.
Yeah.
Because they are ununiversalizable. I don't even know if that's a word.
Yeah.
I just made it up.
I get it. I know what you're saying.
Right? And so patterns are not truth.
Yeah.
Whether they're our own patterns or whether they're cultural patterns or patterns in the human race, they have been ways in which we have, just like everybody else, we've learned to protect ourselves. We've learned to, make our lives work, blah, blah, blah. But life changes. We grow, we mature, and we discover those things that aren't true. We have to let them go.
Yeah. So, Peach, I want your thoughts on this. So, how long have you been in Science of Mind?
A very long time.
Right.
So almost 40 years.
Yeah.
Over 40 years.
Yeah. So my question to you is, so I've read the Science of Mind book or textbook. I just think it's a book. I think I thought it was a fabulous read. Some people have trouble with the wording and couldn't get through. I just devoured the whole thing and loved it. But there was a foreword that said, you have to be prepared to read this. The book has to almost find you. So my thing is, like, we know the truth. I know the truth, and that's fabulous. I just don't understand how some people can see the truth and live it and be it, and then other people are just so completely blind to it, and not just blind to it, but are so closed to even the idea of it, that we are all one. That we are individualized expressions of that one. Of the thing itself, completely close to it, will not even entertain that thought. And so I've always I've had this conversation in my own head, did something happen to me, or is it the life that I've led and my experiences that opened me up to that has always been the truth of my life, everyone else's life, and all of creation. What is it about? How do some people find it and immediately yes, duh, and other people are just absolutely not? How?
Well, I would answer that question in two ways. First, they're not just finding science of mind, right? Metaphysics and mysticism and the truth is available in every spiritual tradition. It's available in humanism. It's available in philosophy, and it's available in science. What gets challenged are the framework that people have accepted as a part of the truth that provides certainty. And the loss of certainty is frightening. I am going to heaven. You are going to hell. I'm a good person. I know what it means to be a good person. I follow these rules. I pray this way. I live this kind of life. I am safe. I am secure, not just in this life, but more importantly, in the eternal life that I have. Otherwise, I'm so afraid I don't even know what to do. And so the truth is actually available in every tradition. What Science of Mind has tried to do is to decouple it from any outer practice. So there's no clothing to wear. There's no way to kneel. There's no way to hold your body. There's nothing to eat or not eat. There's no thou shalt nots. Right? Because it's taking the truth that is in every mystical tradition and underlies the metaphysics of every spiritual faith, and tries to tease it out from underneath its cultural trappings and its exo practice. But but it's that exo practice, the beads or the prayer or the scientific viewpoint that this we understand the laws of nature and forget this weird thing, the uncertainty principle. No, we don't want to be uncertain of anything. We know that, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think it's that, and I think that that's a maturing of humanity as a whole. And it's a maturing for all of us, right? Remember when you first discovered your parents didn't know everything, or that actually they were wrong sometimes? That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Right? That's scary. And then all of a sudden you're flung out into the world and you have to figure out your own bills and you have to figure out how to raise your child and you have to figure out what to do with, you know, all the temptations that take you off purpose. And you're like, this is really hard. I mean, I can remember when I first got into Science of Mind, I can remember going to my minister in the first few years, just tell me what to do. For God's sakes, I will do it. Just freaking tell me what to do. I thought my head was going to explode. Yeah. I thought my heart was going to explode. I was like, I don't even, it was so, because my life was a freaking mess and I just wanted somebody to fix it. If you will do this, you will be safe. If you do this, you will be well. If you do this, God will reward you with money, or you will go to heaven, or whatever it is.
Right.
And giving that up for the maturity of being of a mature spirituality. And there are people practicing in every faith tradition who have a mature spirituality. They are living from the inside of their faith tradition. They're not clinging to the outside, which is, of course, precisely what Jesus said when he said, don't be a Pharisee, praying on the street corner where everybody can see you.
Exactly.
Right. Blah, blah, blah. Go into the closet, close the door, do it in secret. Your Father will reward you and reward you openly, right? Because it's inside, it's inner. It's not that we're doing, our doingness comes out of that. And so, yeah, so, and so that people, I crave certainty. This last year, we've all, think of, the uncertainty we've had with the pandemic. I mean, haven't we had moments of, God, could it just settle? Panic, anxiety, all kinds of mental illnesses have been increased, domestic abuse, domestic violence, not only because people are stuck at home, but because that escalation of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And the climate change and the change of the economic system creates all that uncertainty for people with agricultural jobs and blue collar jobs, and that spirals then into all that uncertainty. I want somebody to fix it, tell me what to do. Great, let's tell you what to do. We're going to make the Asians wrong. It'll be so much better. We'll just make the Asians wrong. That Chinese food, And it doesn't have to be said a lot. It just has to be said in certain places by certain people in a certain way. And boom, all of a sudden I have certainty. I know how this came about, right? All the conspiracy theories, they're all about certainty. That's what all a conspiracy does, is give you certainty about something that is so complex or confusing that you don't actually know exactly what's going on. So conspiracy theories fill in that gap of certainty.
Wow.
That's what I think.
Oh my God, I freaking love it. You guys, we went so deep on this one that we ain't got no time for this today. We ain't got no time. Wow, this conversation though.
I know, I love you guys. I love talking about this stuff.
Oh, I really needed this conversation. Listen, you guys, we're so happy that the rest of you joined us on YouTube Live. Thank you for joining us. We are here every Tuesday, 1 p.m. If you want to know more about us and what we're about, what we teach and what we practice together, CSLDallas.org. And if you want to know what the word metaphysics mean, if you're brand new to this, what does the word metaphysics mean? Girl, we just talked about this past Sunday. So
yes, go check out.
See that talk. It was epic.
It was epic.
So good. So that talk it's on YouTube, on Facebook. Check it out. You can learn all about what metaphysics actually means. So, hey, listen, we love you. We see you. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for liking us and subscribing to us. We love you so much. We're so happy that you found us. And listen, we got your back. We love you. We love you. We love you. And we'll see you next week, Tuesday.